What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the Game Week 3 preview. So I'm going to go through a little bit of news that's relevant for FPL and then jump into some of your questions to hopefully help you along the way. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to check out Fantasy Football Hub if you haven't already. Loads of tools over there to help you do better at FPL. And there's 50% off at the moment. And if you sign up and don't win your mini league, you will get your money back. Terms and conditions do apply for that. All the links you need are in the description below. All right, let's start with Eddie Nketiah. Last week I spoke about how he might be on his way to Nottingham Forest. That would give them another forward option to consider every single week. But it looks like that deal is off. And David Ornstein tweeted yesterday to say that Nketiah has been granted permission by Arsenal to undergo medical ahead of completing a proposed move to Crystal Palace. No problems expected on personal terms and stuff like that. So the deal is not done, but it could be by the time this video goes out. I don't think Nketiah is necessarily going to be first choice there. And some people might say, well, why would he go from being on the bench at Arsenal to being on the bench at Crystal Palace? But I think with Arsenal, as we've seen over the last few years, he's got no chance of being in that 11 regularly without lots of injuries. Whereas at least at Crystal Palace, there is a chance that he could force his way into the team. I think if Mateta stays, he'll absolutely be first choice. But if Edouard goes, then Nketiah only needs one injury or, a drop in form or something like that from Mateta to be in that 11. And I do think he's a really good player. And I think if we could guarantee minutes from him at any point during the season, he'll be a good option at 5.9. But I don't see him going straight into the team. I'm not sure that Glasner will set up with an Nketiah and Mateta front two. I just don't think that would happen, or one of them dropping behind. We'll have to wait and see, obviously. Maybe he's got something up his sleeve. But I think Nketiah is going there to try and force his way into the 11, not necessarily to be a starter straight away. So one to monitor, but not someone to put into your FPL squad right now. All right, let's get into some of your questions. So what are your thoughts on Rodgers versus Bailey? Is Bailey worth 1.5 million more than Rodgers? Now, when this question came in, Rodgers was 5 million. He's gone up in price overnight. He's now 5.1. So the difference is 1.4. I think if we're leaving value to the side for a second and we're just looking at FPL points, Bailey is better for me on the information we have right now. And I think that's pretty clear. Like, there's a lot of hype around Rodgers. We've all seen him play in the first two games. He's played really well. We're hoping that translates to FPL points with the fixture run they've got coming up. But Leon Bailey is a proven attacker. And when he gets minutes, he gets returns. Last year, it was 10 goals, 11 assists in the league. And there's no reason why he couldn't do something similar this year. Villa are a very good team. There's a reason they got in the Champions League. And he is going to be one of the main attacking threats for them this season outside of Ollie Watkins. So I think Leon Bailey right now, if I had to predict who's going to score more points from now until the end of the season, it would clearly be him. But that's not all FPL is about, which I know sounds stupid, but you've got to take value into account. And I think Rodgers for 1.4 million less might be the better option, especially if it opens up a different route for you to go with your transfers. So you need to think in the future, could that 1.4 million come in handy? If not, then maybe you should just go for Leon Bailey. But for a lot of people, that extra money will be really useful. And there is a chance that Rodgers does as well as Bailey on points and possibly outscores him. But I think we need to temper our expectations around him. We're not sure long-term whether he's definitely going to be in the team and what his output might be like. It's all well and good playing well, like being a good player. That doesn't always translate to FPL points. Look at Bernardo Silva, for example, at Man City. Maybe it's a bit harsh to always bring him up as an example. Fantastic player, very rarely a great FPL option. So I like Rodgers. I've got him in my team. I've had him since game week 1. I think people are right to bring him in. He's a good option, great fixtures. But I think the idea that he's going to score more points than Bailey, I'm just not convinced about. The only thing I will say, we don't know because we haven't got enough evidence about this from last season, about how Rodgers' minutes will be when Champions League starts. He might be an absolute machine and just be able to play midweek, weekend, midweek, etc. Whereas with Leon Bailey, I think there is a chance that he might get his minutes managed a little bit once Champions League starts up. So if I was buying one of these this week, I think it would mostly be Rodgers because I think that money will be handy for people in the future. But you need to consider your future transfers. And if it's not, Leon Bailey is probably where my money would be for actual points. I love the way this question is worded. Once again, is there any solid news on Kyle Walker? Is Rico Lewis still safe? Now, there's no news on Walker because there's not really anything to report on. As far as we know, he's fit and available. He's been in the Man City squad for the last 2 games. He just wasn't used off the bench. We know, obviously, he was away with England at the Euros and played a lot of minutes. And I think Pep Guardiola is quite mindful of not bringing players back too quickly, especially when you've got such a good squad that can win games without some of their key players. So Rodri, Foden, Walker, they're not going to be rushed back into the team. It seems like he'd rather give them time to recover properly to make sure they're able to play a lot of games later on in the season, especially when European matches and stuff like that start up. So if you're waiting for, I don't know, a newspaper report or Pep Guardiola to come out and say, guess what, Kyle Walker's not playing for the next 5-6 weeks, you're not going to get it. So is Rico Lewis still safe? It depends what you mean by safe. Do I think he'll start in game week 3? I think there's a very good chance. Can I predict that he's going to keep starting game week 4 onwards? No. Right? Simple as that. I don't think we can say right now that Lewis is absolutely first choice and Kyle Walker's got to battle his way back into the team. I think at any moment, Kyle Walker could just start. And I think the longer you leave the Rico Lewis move, if you're thinking about bringing him in still, the worse it gets. This worry over Kyle Walker coming back into the side is not going to get better. It's going to get worse because the more games that are played, the more rest he gets, the more chance he's going to be used. Now, Rico Lewis is playing really well and he's not done himself any harm in terms of keeping himself in the side. And the numbers for the last game, right, 0.53 expected goals, absolutely ridiculous. He did hit the bar. He came very close to an attack and return. But Kyle Walker has also been super important to Pep. And if he doesn't leave the club, which it doesn't look like it's going to happen now, he's going to be used in the league. It is just going to happen. And it's not even just the longer you leave it, the worse it's going to get with the Walker situation. The worse the fixtures get too. Like West Ham away, Brentford at home, not bad. Then Arsenal at home in 5, Newcastle away in 6. Not expecting clean sheets necessarily in 5 or 6. So you've really got to make your move now, I think. Like I think if you get after the international break and you still haven't bought Rico Lewis, I think you've just got to let him go. Unless you're super confident that Kyle Walker is not first choice anymore. And I just don't think I would be. And it's a shame because after the Newcastle game, you've got Fulham at home, Wolves away, Southampton at home, Bournemouth away. I would love to have a 4.5 million Man City defender that's as attacking as Rico Lewis is. But I'm just not sure it's necessarily worth the hassle. The one thing to say with Man City is we do often get quite a few leaks. And if their games are early on in the game week, you may well get information whether he's starting week in, week out. And for 4.5 million, that could still be worth it. But is he safe to pick? It depends what your definition of safe is. But if you mean, is he going to start the next 4 or 5 weeks guaranteed? Of course, we can't guarantee that. So is Andrew Robertson a good alternative to Trent given his price tag? And I think the simple answer is yes. After Man United away in game week 3, Liverpool's fixtures are decent. They've already done well in the first 2 games defensively. And that million saving could be really useful for other areas of your squad. So I don't think there's any need to bring him in this week unless you're maybe on wildcard or something like that. Because even if you think Liverpool are going to beat Man United, I would expect Man United to score in that game. But then from 4 onwards, it's Forest at home, Bournemouth at home, Wolves away, and Palace away, which I think is quite nice as a little 4-game fixture run for Liverpool. And you can always move him on to someone else after that. So I would definitely think about Robertson. He's not as safe as someone like Van Dijk, but he's pretty safe, right? We know he's first choice left back. He's going to be in that team when he's fit and available. My initial thoughts when I saw the question is Robertson's always got slight competition in Tsimikas. And I mean slight because Robertson is clearly first choice. And when he's fit and available, he's almost always going to play. But in the past, that's been like a slight disadvantage over Trent, who's had no competition. But that's not even fair anymore because Trent's literally got Connor Bradley, who is probably a better backup than Tsimikas is on the other side. And we've already seen in the first couple of games that Trent has been subbed off early, 76 minutes in game week 1 and 71 minutes in game week 2. Now, Trent is someone that was away for the Euros, so didn't have much of a pre-season. That could be playing a part as well. But it could also just be that Connor Bradley's really good. So I think from an attacking perspective, Trent is still better. But that 1 million, I think is going to come in really handy. And I think when people wildcard, I think more people will come off Trent than are currently on him right now. It's definitely something I'm going to consider. In terms of the attacking numbers, I'm going to pull them up on Fantasy Football Hub. So I've got my custom table here. If you want to check this stuff out, as always, 50% off to use all. 50% off at the moment. You can make use of all the tools, not just this one. But this one's super handy. So if we look at Trent so far this season, he is at, let me see here, 0.1 non-penalty expected goals per 90, 0.92 expected assists. Obviously, those numbers, the assist ones, will come down a little bit as the season goes on. But it just shows how creative he can be. With Robertson, let me see what his goal threat is. 0.16, so slightly higher goal threat in the first 2 games than Trent, and 0.17 expected assists. So there is still attacking potential there. It's not like he's going to tuck in as a left centre-back or anything like that. And if we look at previous season, let me go to last year, Robertson was still putting out 0.1 non-penalty expected goals per 90, 0.23 expected assists, compared to Trent. Quickly compare here. 0.12 non-penalty expected goals, 0.24 expected assists. They were actually quite similar. I think I would always back Trent to get me more returns, but I think that million saving could be really worth it. And I'll tell you now, if I wildcard in 4, there's a higher than 50% chance that Robertson is in my team. So I think he's a really good alternative. So who are the best Game Week 3 captaincy options? And I would probably narrow it down to 3 players. So Saka against Brighton at home, Palmer against Palace at home, and then Haaland against West Ham away. I don't think it's ever a terrible decision to captain Salah, even against Man United away. I just think with the fixtures Liverpool have got early on, if you're ever going to back against him in one of them, this is probably the week to do it. And Liverpool and Salah have done really well against Man United in recent seasons. But at Old Trafford, I wouldn't expect a massive score. And I think it could be a tough enough game for Liverpool. So he might walk away with 1 return, but I'm not sure I'd put too much money on him getting more than that. It's possible, of course it is, right? He's such a good player. But I think this is probably a good game week to go for someone else instead. If Haaland was at home to West Ham, I'm not even sure there would be much of a conversation here. I think he would just be the best choice. Because it's away, it's a little bit trickier. And I do like captaining midfielders where possible because you've got that extra point for a goal, extra point for a clean sheet, as we've discussed many times before. Saka is always great. He showed that in the first game, goal and assist. He's already got another assist in the second one as well. He's super consistent. I still think sometimes we have to remind ourselves how good Saka is. I think sometimes it takes years and years of scoring massive points like Salah until we just accept he's great. And we're not quite there yet with Saka, but he is great, right? So he's never a terrible option either. And I think Brighton at home, Arsenal will get chances, right? They're very strong at their home ground, as most teams are. But I don't know. I look at West Ham versus Brighton, and I just think, could Brighton put in a decent defensive performance? Possibly. Do I see West Ham doing that? Not necessarily. Like, I think they will improve this season. They've made some good signings as well. But we saw Crystal Palace had quite a few chances in that game. They just couldn't put them away. That's not going to happen with someone like Haaland. So I've got Saka and Haaland in my team. And to be honest with you, I've not really given Saka too much thought. If I wildcarded this week and went for a Salah-only draft, I would captain Saka over Salah. I'm not sure I can captain over Haaland. Palmer's a tricky one because as much as I don't think you should take into account the points that have just been scored when making your decision, it's very difficult to forget about the fact of what he's just done to Wolves. And Palace haven't looked great defensively so far. I wouldn't even be surprised if Gay is not at Crystal Palace by the time this game is played. They got another defensive injury last night. Anderson has gone as well. It feels like suddenly all stars are aligning that Palmer is just a great choice this week. We know he's nailed on. He's definitely going to play. And there's going to be chances. So I think if I was going to go against Haaland, it'd probably be Palmer over Saka. And I don't know how much of that is based on what happened last week, because I think Saka is great. But ultimately, I think if I had all 3 of these players, I'd probably go for Haaland, just about. And also, his ownership is still fairly low compared to what he can deliver. It's much lower than it has been in previous seasons. So you're still getting quite a good gain from captaincy that you weren't, in previous seasons. So maybe if this was last year, I'd be thinking about Palmer as the differential option. But actually, I just don't think it's enough to go against Haaland. So it's probably just about Haaland for me, then Palmer, then Saka. But if you wanted to go for one of the other 2, they're really good options as well this week. So are Spurs players like Son, Maddison and Porro still relevant? Well, I guess first of all, it depends what you mean by relevant. But let's go through the different options. Would I buy any of them this week? No, probably not. Would I include any of them on wildcard? Possibly Porro, but probably not the other 2. And if I owned any of them, would I go out of my way to sell them this week? Probably not, right? If I owned them and I could roll a transfer instead and just play them against Newcastle away, that is what I would do in most situations, unless there's a player you can bring in that's a massive upgrade. So if you had Son and 0.5 million in the bank to go up to Cole Palmer, that might be a pretty good move because of the fixtures they've got. But I don't think they're all of a sudden like problems in your team, right? The first 2 fixtures were good, Leicester away and Everton at home. We knew they were the best 2 of the first 4 fixtures. And now they've got Newcastle away, then Arsenal at home, which is going to be really tricky. But then it's Brentford at home in 5, which is a pretty good fixture. And we've seen how Newcastle have defended so far this season. I know it's only 2 games, by the way, but it hasn't been fantastic. Tonali might be back soon. That could help them, absolutely. But I think Spurs will get chances in that game. Not necessarily a clean sheet, though. So I think Porro might be a slight issue. And then Arsenal's going to be really tricky But again, it's at home. There'll probably be goals in that game. So I don't think they're massive concerns, but they're not really... They're not as good an option as they were in pre-season when we were building our Game Week 1 squads, because now you've lost the Leicester and Everton fixtures. And it's not that, someone like Son has all of a sudden become an awful player or option for FPL. He's just got 16 points against Everton, for example. But if you're comparing him to Saka, well, Saka's got Brighton at home, Spurs away, which is a pretty good fixture, and in 6 and 7 he's got Leicester and Southampton at home. And Palmer's got a really good run ahead of him right now as well. So again, I think it was perfectly reasonable to ignore Palmer in pre-season because he had Man City in the first game. Saka had better fixtures, for example, so did Son. But all of a sudden the landscape changes because so do the fixtures. So I think Spurs players are absolutely relevant. I don't think any of Son, Maddison and Porro are particularly terrible, but you wouldn't be buying any of them now. And if you did want to sell any of them, that wouldn't necessarily be a bad move either. With Maddison in particular, by the way, because I've seen a few comments saying you're just not talking about him enough. And I think he has looked really good in the first couple of games. But you've got to remember, he is 7.5 million. And look, he's got an assist in both of them as well, 5-6 points. But that's more what he's going to get you is assists rather than goals. Of course he can score. We've seen it plenty of times before. But he's more creative than a goal threat in that Spurs team. And 7.5, it sounds stupid because I don't think it is too expensive for him. But when you then factor in the other players you can buy for cheaper, it does feel a bit expensive. Like in Burmo, for example, if Tony leaves this week, he's going to be on penalty. Southampton at home. Okay, then it's 2 tricky away games, but the fixtures get really good from game week 6 onwards. So you save 0.5 and you've got penalties and guaranteed minutes. Although James Maddison right now is absolutely fine for minutes, he is getting subbed off before the 80th. And if he puts in a couple of bad performances, he could come out of that team. Spurs have got plenty of options. In Burmo, that's just not going to happen with. And then you've got Eze still. I would die on the hill that Eze is still a good pick. Chelsea away is not great this week, but then it's Leicester at home in game week 4. He's also cheaper than Maddison, right? And then you've got Smith Rowe, Rodgers people are buying. I just don't really see where Maddison fits in to teams right now, especially with the next 2 fixtures. Porro, fine. Son, fine. Maddison, not really that interested at all right now. So after Madueke's hat-trick, he surely has to be undroppable. What are your thoughts on Nkunku to Madueke? Now, when I first saw this question, my initial thoughts were, everyone is undroppable until they're not anymore. And Madueke has done himself no harm by scoring a hat-trick. I think everyone out there will predict him to be in the first 11 against Crystal Palace. I definitely would as well. The problem is longer term. Will he remain in the side? If he keeps scoring hat-tricks every week, he will. But I don't think that's very likely, right? And the problem with Chelsea, and maybe it's because I've been burnt with Nkunku that I've got this view now, there are just too many players there, and I don't think they've stopped buying yet. If they signed another 1, 2, 3 players before the transfer window was up, would anyone be surprised? Probably not. Now, you will have that information before the Game Week 3 deadline because the transfer window shuts on Friday, but I certainly wouldn't make any early moves. And I don't think we can say that Madueke is nailed in that right wing spot. Remember that Palmer played there a lot last season. It was basically his position. And I know he can play really well centrally. We saw that last week. And lots of Chelsea fans want him to play centrally. That doesn't mean it will happen. So let's say they sign even just one player and it's a number 9, right? There's rumours going around about Tony. I think that might be a smokescreen. They're going to end up with Osherman. But let's say that they sign Ivan Toney. So I think most weeks, Tony or Jackson probably going to start as the number 9. So that's one position taken. They've just signed João Felix. He's great. They've got Nkunku. He's great, right? I know for FPL he's now a major issue, but let's not forget he's a great player. So where do those 2 players fit into the team? Do they just get benched every week? Seems unlikely, right? One of them could play number 10. Let's say Nkunku gets put there in one of the games. Then you've got someone to play on the left. Probably Neto. Could be João Felix. He could play out there as well. Well, where does Cole Palmer go? He's definitely going to play, right? So he's going to be on the right. And even if Palmer plays centrally every game, they could put Neto on the right in some games. I don't think they've signed him just to sit him on the bench permanently. And then you've got João Felix, Mudryk, Nkunku, whoever, to play on the left. Now, they could set up in different ways, right? João Felix or Nkunku could play centrally. But this is the problem. There are so many combinations. I don't think anyone can sit here and say that Madueke is nailed. Is he nailed to be in the 11 for Palace at home in game week 3? I'd say probably yes, right? Depending on what happens on Thursday. They've got another European match against Sivert. Long term, I just don't know if the minutes are there. Maybe they will be for the next 3-4 game weeks, and that's enough, right? It's just worth jumping on him, while he's in great form, etc. I'm just not convinced it's worth the headache. It's it's an annoying situation because the fixtures are so good, but I just think there's so many combinations in how they can set up. And as much as I think Nkunku's probably worth getting rid of for FPL, I don't think he's done as a Chelsea player. I think he's one of their best options. And that's the problem. They've got a ton of them now. And Madueke is not necessarily ahead of all of them in terms of quality and stuff like that. But he will be for Game Week 3. So if you want to jump on him, no issues with that. But I think he could be an issue longer term. And if you've already eaten the price drop for Nkunku and you've got a decent 11 you can just bench him this week, to be honest, I'd just be waiting to see what happens in Game Week 3 now and just make your move ahead of Game Week 4 with an extra free transfer. So Madueke's going to make me eat my words, I know it, but I'm not sure I'd be rushing out to buy him. Palmer I get because he's always going to start. I don't think I could say that about Madueke. So what do you think about Moreno or Aina as options for Nottingham Forest? Both are 4.4 million now. Essentially, I think they almost nullify each other as options because they can both play left back. And so I look at it right now and think there's a bit of a minutes concern there. Like, I don't think they've signed Moreno just to sit on the bench, but is he going to go straight into the team? Not necessarily. And there was a lot of talk from Nottingham Forest fans in pre-season that Aina can also play right back. So it might be that long term, Moreno's going to play left back, Aina's going to play right back, and Nico Williams just comes out of the team. But I don't know if we can guarantee that right now, and I'm just not sure it's worth making a defender transfer or even putting them on wildcard with the uncertainty. And also, the upcoming fixtures are not amazing. Like, Wolves at home this week is good, but then you've got 2 away games against Liverpool and Brighton. I don't see clean sheets in either of them. Then you've got Fulham at home in 6, which is good, but then it's Chelsea away in 7. After that, it gets decent again. Palace at home, Leicester away, West Ham at home. And obviously, they're cheap options, so you don't have to play them every week. You can bench them in the tougher games. But I'd want to be sure that they're going to get minutes going forward. And look, if you're a Nottingham Forest fan, let me know in the comments below. Perhaps it is going to be Moreno left back, Aina right back. But Nico Williams has been pretty good for them. Possibly, maybe he'll leave before the window shuts. We'll have to wait and see. But I think right now, with the information we've got, as much as they could be good value for that price, and we've seen how attacking Moreno can be at Aston Villa, they're probably an ignore for now. So if you have 5 or 6 players playing against each other, what's the best way to navigate that? Is it worth a transfer to optimise more points? So the way that I would handle this is to go through each player individually and just decide whether they are worth a transfer. Is there a player you can bring in that's going to net you more points this week and in the future? Or would it be better just to save that free transfer and try and forget about the fact you've got a bunch of other players playing in the same match? So take my team, for example. Now, I don't have 5 or 6 players in the same match, but I've got a combination that a lot of people will have, and that's Isak versus Porro. And let's say that my bench was terrible, so I've got to play Porro and Isak in this game. I would look at Isak first and say, is there a move I can make? Bearing in mind I've already made a transfer this week, so it would take a hit. Is there a hit worth it to sell Isak for? Absolutely not, right? So I'm not even taking into account the fact I've got Pedro Porro. I just don't think there's a transfer worth it for Isak. Even if I had a free transfer, I'd probably rather save it than selling Isak before Spurs at home. Now, in this scenario, I've got no bench, right? So I look at Pedro Porro. Is there a move I could make that's much better this week and long term as well? Possibly, if I had money in the bank, I could go to an Arsenal defender. But then they've got 2 not so good fixtures afterwards, Spurs and Man City away. I would quite like a Liverpool defender from Game Week 4. But they're not that much better for me this week because they play Man United away. So I'd probably look at it and say it's probably just worth keeping Pedro Porro, even though I know once Isak scores, I've lost the clean sheet. It's still just not worth a transfer in my team. And that's what I would do in your squad. If you've got 4 to 6 players from, I'm going to assume it's the Newcastle Spurs game for a lot of people. And the fact also, by the way, that the person that asked this question has NUFC in their username. So I'm going to assume it's a Newcastle fan. You've probably got a few players. I just wouldn't worry about it that much. It's not ideal, especially if the match ends up being like a boring 1-1 draw or something like that. But it is possible for multiple players to get points in the same game. We see that plenty of times. Like Isak could score for me, and then Pedro Porro could score as well. And that would be the ideal situation from an FPL point of view. So that's what I would do. I would just take into account every player in isolation and try and forget about the fact they're all playing against each other, which is easy to say, not as easy to do. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. Rate 5 stars if you're listening on podcasts and enjoying the content. Make sure to check out Fantasy Football Hub as well. Links in the description below. 50% off at the moment. Loads of tools over there to help you do better at FPL, including the one that I showed you earlier. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow with the team selection. I'll see you then.